Welcome to the Self Within podcast, where we will look to ancient traditions and modern insights to seek guidance, knowledge, and practical tools to help us reconnect with our true selves. Join me, your host, as we explore various topics from mindfulness and meditation to energy healing, astrology, and much more. We'll hear from experts and everyday individuals to explore the connections that exist between mind, body, and spirit, and how we can use them for personal growth. Okay, if you've never tried meditation, it may seem daunting. Or perhaps you've attempted it and been frustrated because you've found yourself unable to sit still and clear your mind. Many of us think of meditation as someone sitting in lotus position, eyes closed, and with a look of serenity on their face. And while this may be true for some, meditation doesn't have to look like this. And today we will be discussing meditation with Teresa Keller, licensed professional counselor, certified Hatha and yoga for healing teacher, and certified AcuDetox specialist. Teresa works at Headspace and is founder of a meditation consulting business and collective called Upaya PLLC. So let's dive into exploring how we can apply meditation in our everyday lives. Welcome, Teresa. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Annabelle, for having me.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. I want to talk about meditation. It's a practice that I find myself doing it for a while, being very consistent, and then I take a long pause and then I come back to it very sporadically. And so it can be hard. And I think there's a part of it that seems like it should be easy. We're really trying to find peace and presence in our day. I mean, who doesn't want that? But at the same time, it can be hard for many reasons. So I'd love to hear your take on why that might be.
Well, I think you pose an excellent question and especially important for any practitioner of mindfulness or meditation at any part in their journey. I think this can be true for those who are disciplined, fall away, come back, or those who are just starting out in their journey. And before I get going with my responses, I just want to make note that what I'm sharing here is really with a deep gratitude to many teachers, other meditation practitioners that have shared in these practices that I'll be reflecting, and that any errors in sharing traditional methods or viewpoints are my own. So, to answer your question or to attempt, peace and presence are absolutely part of the journey, without a doubt. That's been the experience here. And it's not all that's happening. For many of us, we find as we move along an invitation to be honest in the view. And a way to consider this meditation helps us to see things as they are. We may have, and often do, have many habituated ways that buffer us to see things as they are, such as busyness or difficulties that can get in the way. We might not even know it.
Mm.
So the question you ask is very important. Some come with expectations of what meditation is, perhaps a romanticized view of a concept that is perhaps misleading. I've heard things like, I expected meditation to stop the thoughts,
Mm.
or I want to get calm. I want to be peaceful. I want to solve a problem or improve my life. And while those things can happen through meditation, when we make them the aim and the goal, we miss out on a whole display that is happening. And we might really, again, skip over things that might be getting in the way of us seeing clearly and having access to the wisdom that I believe we all have within us. So, for anyone who's spent even a few moments looking at the mind and seeing what rises and falls, it's a pretty wide scope. And there's this concept of equanimity, being able to be at ease with whatever arises.
Yeah.
At ease with unease. There's a beautiful saying from wrote the book Everyday Zen, Joko Beck. Excellent read, especially for an introduction It is from the Zen tradition of Buddhism. However, it's written in a very universal way toward invitation to meditation. And Joko Beck says anyone who is willing to look at the mind for even a few minutes is courageous. And I think, given that, we could really contemplate that and sit with that. It's courageous to show up.
I really like what you talked about with the goal piece because we are so goal driven. And it's almost if we don't have end goal, then why do it?
Mhm.
And I realize that's not everyone's perception. But I would say, especially people that are in working environments that are in the corporate world or very performance driven, that can definitely be something that comes up for them. And so, to your point, if the goal is for peace, you might get there, but the journey takes consistency, it takes practice. And I find that a lot of people, myself included in the beginning, it's easy to give up right at the start because you're not getting the end result. And so, I love this thought. If we can eliminate that goal at the outset and just do it for the sake of doing and being and feeling and experiencing and curiosity and all these other adjectives that we can think of, then maybe the experience will be different.
That's beautiful and a wonderful reframe. And I actually was also thinking as you brought up what you said earlier about peace, about what we have in common. And we hear that from practitioners and folks who enter meditation as they start to develop their intention. And even those who might not have a meditation practice is we look expansively out to all beings and say, what's the commonality? And you named it. We all want to be at peace, free of suffering. And so, in the Buddhist tradition, which is really where I'm speaking from a training background, is over a number of decades of having these traditions shared with me generously and with great fortune. Um, it might be helpful to establish some definitions around what is meditation, since it was mentioned what it might not be. So it might
Mm,
not calm, especially as things arise. It can feel somewhat chaotic as somebody stops to look at their mind and see,
mm,
wow, there's a lot going on. The idea is there's not a problem with that. The problem is maybe in our relationship to that, in our habituated relationship to that. So there's said to be these two pillars of mindfulness. And my main meditation teacher, Michael Gregory, a former monk, shared that those two pillars are there is what is happening, and then there is our relationship to what is happening. Then we consider that and put that to this historic definition of meditation is to remember the instructions or to familiarize the mind with itself and its contents. And so, if we're taking our life force and familiarizing it with things that are not about our intentions of peace, that might be frivolous or entertaining, or maybe even just idle speech or idle passing of time, we might not find that deep connection. And so we start to use meditation in a way where we learn to connect deeply so that before you know it, things that once seem mundane, all of a sudden, there's a world within a world. You're looking at a blade of grass and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this blade of grass doesn't exist independently. It is because of the air, because of the soil, because of the poo that landed on it last week that helped it grow. So perhaps, and this is actually a concept that the late Thich Nhat Hanh passed on a few years ago, Vietnamese monk and leader in meditation. And he said, there's this word interbe. And I adore this way of looking at things as we walk through the world of I don't exist in isolation. The I over here, there is this happening and this interbeing. And that if not for all the ingredients, this moment wouldn't be what it is. And that includes the supposed good and bad. There could be
mm.
hiccups and bumps. And so it is said to be perfectly happening not because it's good, but because all the ingredients that came in to play are here. So if poop came into the situation,
Yeah.
that's part of it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that. Yeah. There's so many layers. And oftentimes we are just looking at the surface and we take it for just that initial first impression that we see. If we give ourselves the time and the space to truly look beneath that surface layer at all of the other things that have come into play, then there's so much more depth there. There's so much more connection, as you just said. And I think meditation can be a way to get there. As you said, it's starting to pay attention to the mind, what is there, being non judgmental of it. Whatever comes up, comes up. And maybe that's a great first intention to have. If you're just starting out with meditation, or maybe if you've done it before and been frustrated because you haven't found that romanticized version of what you thought it should look like, maybe reframing it as, let me just start by paying attention. What is there? And once you pay attention, then you can take the next step, and the next step continues to unfold and it takes you down a different path. I don't know if there's necessarily a right or wrong way, as long as you're giving yourself the time and the space to just be.
Beautiful. And that actually speaks to the question of what is mindfulness. You somewhat defined it. I don't know if that was your intention, Annabelle,
No, it
but
was.
that was beautiful. Is again, another traditional definition is to place the mind where you want and keep it there. And that's placing attention. And so when we say being mindful, we can intellectualize it and cognize it, and we can think, yeah, that sounds easy enough. But do we? And so we're seeing a propensity in our society of a decreasing, and science can indicate this. Harvard terms it the popcorn brain.
Mm,
Social media, the amount of time that it takes before we switch and scroll or swipe is going down, not up. And so our attentiveness in society is a thing. So back to the attention, it shows up in meditation pretty quickly, whether it's walking meditation or we're sitting in nature or we're sitting on a cushion. And it's definitely not about sitting like a pretzel and in our Lululemons, but it's more of finding a stable posture. And there's some history behind that of finding this posture that's upright and alert, allowing energy to be an aid and finding physical ways to stabilize the body and the mind so that we can look clearly. And so, for some of us, when we go to sit, we might find that habitual difficulty with attention shows up in the what's next, gotta go.
right.
So, if we were to take that and join it with what you suggested, which is, can we use our intention to point our practice? Maybe if I could notice that the gotta go agitation, restlessness shows up, start feeling the wiggles or the mind starts to wander around, let's say 2 minutes, that I know that's the edge. And I might work with that edge, expand intentional attention. And so then I might stay with that 2 minutes right to the edge. And for sure, there's said to be this wonderful, both in psychology and in traditional meditation practices, making sure that we acknowledge the effort and so that we're encouraging ourselves along the way. So if I do set that edge to be 2 minutes, that I can review, I can reflect and say, I set out with that intention to pay attention and I stayed with it. And I reflect on that wholesome effort.
Right.
And instead of, was this a good meditation or a bad meditation? Am I peaceful yet? How about now?
Right.
So, and we might find by relaxing a little bit into that intention that you suggested, that the natural outcomes of stabilizing mind, it will unfold.
Mm. It makes me think of this article that I read, and it had a TED talk too that I watched, but it's called Mastering the Art of Presence. And it talked about how the secret to awareness is non meditation. And in the video, there was this person on stage who had this Tibetan singing bowl and they struck it. And the instruction was to pay attention to the sound. And then after a few minutes, he did the same thing, struck the singing bowl and said, now meditate on the sound. And then he said to the audience, the first one is awareness, just paying attention to the sound, because we all know how to find presence. So, from your experience, what's your take on the difference between awareness and mindfulness meditation?
Excellent distinguishing question. And I'll do the best I can to relate to it in a way that is answering that question. So bear with me, it perhaps go a little bit around the bend here. I'm hearing this beautiful outcome of applied awareness that you and I
Mm,
talked about previously in our conversations. And that's where we're headed. We're training the mind with meditation to be able to be reflexively aware. And that reflexive awareness can start to become familiar. So, again, familiarizing the mind. And almost like if anyone has had the experience of learning how to drive a stick shift, let's say texting, at some point, you forget about the steps. It
mm,
becomes second nature, right? It becomes natural to be reflexively aware. So you might be texting, and if you were to stop somebody and say, what were the last four moves you made with your fingers? You might be hard pressed to find that. There's been some slicking of the track and some practice that's we can slide into that, and there's less discomfort. And there's an attraction with comfort. And that's part of that familiarity with practice, is building in that attractiveness that's wholesome. And so back to the mindfulness point that you had was the difference between awareness and mindfulness meditation. There is a historical foundational approach, foundations of mindfulness. And it was one of the first things that were taught actually in the Buddhist tradition, was the foundation of body breath, a starting point. And so, for that reason, oftentimes we see in mindfulness meditation the object of meditation starts with the breath, because as long as we're alive, we have that. We don't need any fancy bells or whistles or
mhm,
mantras or scripts to simply stay with the breath and the life force. And when we do that, there's another opportunity, just like that blade of grass, a world within a world. We can see how the breath moves with the body. And we can use the breath as a vehicle to understand what's happening and how we're relating to what's happening in mindfulness meditation practices, with repeated application, the method to stay with an object of meditation like the breath. Could be other things, it could be afflicted emotions, which
mm,
is an excellent practice to pay attention to. But that gets a little bit ahead of those first steps, which is just simply the breath and the body, which there's a lot there. And so we can see how perhaps a certain body state, like a short, hot breath, might be related to a tense body, or a long, cool breath might show up with a relaxed body.
mm,
And this is how wisdom develops for ourselves directly, without reading about it, without being academically smart. Meditation in history goes back and is suspected to go back throughout human history. Archaeologists have speculated quite fiercely around this, that as long as humans have been around, that there has been some meditative practice. And so
mm,
traditionally and historically, many of the students were rice farmers and workers. And there wasn't this propensity for scholarly genius.
mm,
And so, in this way, the teachings were shared orally, and practice is key. As the instructions are a gift, now we have lots of cues and clues into what's ideal, what's a conducive state for the body and the mind. And then through contemplative practices, what's conducive to generate these wholesome states, to maintain them, to recognize when we're off key. There's a beautiful talk by Mingyur Rinpoche that can be found on YouTube, who's a Lama who entered in at a very young age as a child into long-term meditation, has some trouble with anxiety, and utilize these practices to help train the mind. So what Mingyur Rinpoche offers is that mindfulness and awareness. So the practice of mindfulness meditation that was able to raise the degree of awareness allowed the catching or the noticing, the attention to notice when there was being off track, let's say, or feeling anxious. And so many people might think that this is all about wholesome states. Oh, well, I was mindful and therefore I caught this wholesome state. When in fact, when we're off track and there's anger, frustration, anxiety, depression, doubt, guilt, and we notice that, now there's conscious awareness. So we have a choice. We can make a choice. But if we don't notice, if we don't have a practice of awareness and we haven't slicked those tracks of neurobiological or just of habit of looking and paying attention, we might miss it.
Mm. Thinking about the instructions for someone wanting to practice or incorporate applied awareness into their everyday, what could that look like?
Yes. This is a very good question because many people have this question. I hear this question in my work. Where do I get started? How do I get into this?
Mm.
And I like your invitation earlier in our conversation about just the one step. And in the work and in psychotherapy, I noticed that confidence in building an entryway that feels accessible is important to success for someone to feel capable.
Mm.
And that building of confidence comes with practice. But how do we get a person from A to B to where they don't maybe see themselves? I hear a lot of times, I can't meditate.
Right.
So consider starting where you're at. And as mentioned, through the world, through the day, there are opportunities. Maybe it's the breath. And just intentionally taking pause. So perhaps I'm not quite ready to sit still. And so I might maybe pause in the day, maybe between activities naturally, and invite myself to take 1, 2, 3 long, luxuriating breaths. I can build that into the day. And this is actually a pretty accessible way if it's already within the day and I don't have to block off time because I'm fighting against the habit of feeling busy and feeling full. And oh, I just don't have time. So, okay, bring it into what's already happening. So perhaps I'm walking from desk to get a drink of water or to the bathroom. And there's a door often in our days. This is a practice many people like is seeing that door as a natural pause
Mm.
and stopping and breathing and feeling and experiencing the breath, not thinking. So this is another habit that seems to get in the way in our culture is this propensity to think. And this idea of awareness, thinking and cognizing have a very different experience than actually experiencing. Many times when we're thinking, we might be really future oriented or past oriented and not here. We might be filling in that space. So that's why getting quiet is what's seen with meditators. And so we get quiet to listen, to feel. And one question that you may have hinted at earlier, it reminded me, is we could prompt ourselves to say, what is this? And then don't cognitively answer. So we're pausing in that doorway And we remember. So there's the meditation quality. We've remembered the instructions. We've remembered to pause. We remember. And there's a cause for celebration there, just like there would be if there was anxiety, like Mingyur Rinpoche noted. I notice anxiety. And instead of this critical voice of, oh gosh, I suck at this, I can't, there I am, anxious again, to celebrate. I caught it. There's the anxiety. I can pay attention to the breath. There's the doorway. I can pause, and allowing that pause and staying with the breath for just 1 to 3 cycles, fully recognizing, fully present. And that's compassion, in my view. That's self-love. And if we can do that for ourselves and we can practice that throughout the day with ourselves, then maybe that's something we can offer the world.
Mm.
And so that's a beautiful way to start. And there are other next steps that might come, because that might spark one to say, I like this. This is starting to be familiar. This is actually a natural place. And that's been found to be true from scientists to meditators alike, that there's this natural state of being human. And it doesn't have the cognitive constructs. It's expansive. It's easy. We may have come in contact with it, maybe not known it.
Mm.
Maybe it's in that sweet spot or sweet place when we're just about to fall asleep. And we can feel this kind of opening of the heart and mind. Or maybe it's after a good rest and the waking up. So the coming in and out of sleep, another wonderful topic to go into, the sleep state where mind is at play because all other faculties are off. And so mind is at play. From there, maybe someone would like to develop a daily practice. And if they do, some recommendations that could be helpful would be to lean into that familiarity, same place, same time. There's something known as the neurons that fire together, wire together in science. And so when we hear about people setting up a meditation space, and some of us might say, oh, that's a little bit of rainbow crystal dolphin there. You know, they got their candles, they got their stuff, they got their bling, and what's all that about? And some of what that can be about is familiarity, is that there's something pleasant that the mind is attracted to. Maybe it's a scent or a wholesome image or images. And then there's this intention, this commitment that you mentioned, Annabelle, like, I'd like to pay attention because I'd like to be peaceful. I mean, ultimately, but for right now, I'd like to just pay attention. And so those little bells and whistles start to become objects that tether the mind. And there's many practices like that. Like you might hear mantra. People say a mantra, oh, is that some sort of magical thing that makes us at ease? Well, historically, the word mantra, it's Sanskrit, mantra, mind, protection, to go for protection, to protect the mind. And so, yes, it's simply these repeated words, but they're intentional and chosen to tether the mind and can distract. And it is encouraged that a person first develop mindfulness and stability there before using maybe or relying on other devices. Because I could speak for myself that I've had pronounced times of laziness using something like mantra where I might stop paying attention because, again, just like that stick shift or that typing or whatever it is that you're habituated to do, all of a sudden the mind wanders away. And there isn't a noticing of that, and perhaps lost and confusion can happen next. And so then how do we find our way back, and how do we make it sustainable? Well, we acknowledge the effort, not the outcome, because sometimes these experiences aren't going to be pleasant. And that's part of it too. If we accept that the only time that we truly suffer is when we demand reality to be different, this coming from my root teacher saying that often is pretty true here. So that's a good one to contemplate. The only time I suffer is when I expect or demand reality to be any way that it is not. And so for that, I'm humbled to say, okay, well, something's got my attention. I applied awareness, I applied effort, and maybe I'm chipping away at decades of habit. So I'm going to be kind to that experience and say the effort was right on time. And that's what I celebrate. And so
Mm,
that helps me come back and try again.
yeah. Celebrating and acknowledging that every step, every try is part of the journey, part of the experience. And whatever comes up and shows up, accepting it. Yeah, we don't celebrate ourselves that often. A celebration seems like it needs to be for something that's big or monumentous. And sometimes these really small things that happen in our day, we just move on. But it could even just be giving yourself a hug or a pat on the back or, you know, I did it. I did 2 minutes. That was a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And it is absolutely okay to find something that is maybe not so profound, like, have a little bite of chocolate.
Oh,
Have
yes. Oh,
have
that's
a
a great
little,
little
right?
reward.
I'll let people take on the sugar issue with that, another conversation, but it is absolutely a wonderful way in. And then we start to find that the practice itself becomes the reward, and we can then discharge off of the chocolate or discontinue the chocolate intervention and just enjoy the practice itself
For
as
what it
reward.
is. Right, right.
So, Annabelle, one other thought about if someone's looking to start a practice, in my experience and as is recommended, having others that have practiced. If I'd like to learn how to ski better, I'm going to go around people who know how to ski well. So perhaps that's one place, and it is an important one traditionally, is to have a community, a practiced community or persons to share, and then seeking a qualified teacher, someone who could maybe give us those instructions. It is lovely to think of the non-meditation path, but oftentimes that non-meditation comes after some practice, and then the dropping of those practice instructions and training wheels comes from a place of stability, where then that moves into the non-meditative place. I think that maybe this is a beautiful place to stop and invite those listening to incorporate it in their own way and think about what their first step might be if there's interest there.
Yeah, yeah, Teresa. And I think the one thing I would say too with finding your community is also the accountability piece. Knowing that whether it's a teacher or a friend or just you're a part of a larger group that does it, even announcing the fact that you're going to be setting this intention, that you're going to give it a try, having that accountability, I think can be so big because that's really hard and difficult. At least I've found that from my own experience. So thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing your wisdom and your experience. And I do hope that for anyone listening, that if you've never tried meditation, that you can incorporate some of these techniques into your daily life and take it one step at a time and just be open to the experience and whatever comes up. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Annabelle. Thank you for the invitation to share something very close and dear to my heart, and wishing all listening and wishing you health, happiness, and ease with unease and ease with ease.
Thank you for listening. If you're interested in becoming a client and working with me, visit me at nunatherapy.com or follow me on social media at Nuna Therapy for regular content and inspiration. Until next time.